quilt. So if you sew a lot or you quilt a lot, you inevitably have these bins like I do of scraps. And so I'm actually in the process of completely reorganizing my sewing room, my studio space, and more on that later. I'm going to be sharing with you all of the little details that I am doing. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is minimize the amount of scraps that I have, and I want to use some of them up. So I wanted to show you today one of the ways that you can make a scrap quilt. So this is what I like to do. I like to sort of create a palette, a color palette, depending on how many scraps you have. I have a lot of scraps, and I have a lot of pink scraps. I have a lot left over from my daughter's quilt and making things for hers. But I didn't want just pink scraps by itself. So I decided to utilize some gray and then also some like a blue-green kind of color. This kind of color. So I'm going to be utilizing all of those together. I will show you some sample pieces that I have up on my design wall as well, so that you can get an idea of sort of what I'm going for, so that I have a little bit of a game plan. Now the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to have my scrap bins out, I'm going to have my ironing board out. These are even more scraps that fit into my color. And so what I'm going to do is pull a scrap out. So if you use bins like I do for organizing your scraps, they're going to be really wrinkly. So the first thing that you want to do, let's find one here. Okay, now here's a scrap. Now for me, a scrap is going to be something smaller than a fat quarter, and a fat quarter is 18 by 22. If it's roughly that size, I'm going to store it, and I'll show you how I do that in an upcoming video. This I would consider a scrap. There'll be just too many of these to try to store, and I will look for the fabric and realize it's just too small to really use for much. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my wrinkly piece of fabric here, and I'm going to iron it out. Now once I have it ironed, what I'm going to do for this one, and there's lots of ways to make scrap quilts, but what I'm going to do is do patchwork squares, all in cut 2.5 by 2.5, because a lot of these scraps are pretty small. So that way I can utilize lots of different scraps and make this look really scrappy and really cool, and we're going to cut them all into 2.5-inch squares. The two rulers that I like to do for this project are a 2.5 by 6 and a 2.5 by 2.5-inch ruler. And you might need a bigger one or two, but when we're working with scraps, generally smaller rulers will be better. You also need a rotary cutter, and I like to use a smaller mat, and I like to use this one that rotates. So I'll get a close-up here. It rotates, and I like that because if I'm using a small piece, then I can easily rotate and cut it. I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, so now my piece is nice and ironed, and now we're going to cut it up into our squares. So keep in mind, you can use bigger pieces like this that are a scrap, or even strips like this, and you can get a bunch of squares out of this, or even bits like this, little teeny ones. So I'm going to show you up close how you can cut all of these different types of fabric. Alright, here is a strip of fabric. You can see it's larger than 2.5 inches wide. So we need to trim it up, fold it up, and then make sure that the black line going across the bottom is completely parallel with the fold. And then we need to trim the sides, both sides, to make sure that it's completely squared. And then there was one side, here's the other side, and then we know we have a 2.5-inch wide strip that then we can subcut down. So here is our strip. And then what we want to do is use that ruler. I really love the 2.5 by 6 for this project. It gives you a little bit more, ruler to actually grip. And then you're going to subcut that down. You can even fold it over like I did here and be able to cut 2 squares at one time. So the quickest way we can do this is a really good option. Here is the last cut. So this is for a strip. This is how you would sort of cut a strip. Now here's a larger scrap piece. And I actually folded it in half twice, and then I cut the side to make sure it was square, and then you need to make sure that that black line is running all the way across the bottom so that you have exactly a 90-degree angle. I will link some more options down below where I have gone into more detail about cutting. I'm just going to go through this really quickly, but that's how you know that you have the right cut. Now this one, you can see that's too small, so it goes way too far into the selvage. And so we don't want to do that. So we just put that one aside and we can use it for something else another time. So here is another piece that I cut, and then here is an example of how you can rotate it. So you, instead of having to pick up your fabric and move your ruler around, you can rotate your mat and then be able to cut the other side. Now here I am sewing them together. As you can see, chain piecing, so you don't have to cut your threads in between each one. 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here is it's a 9 patch. Basically, I'm going to do these in 9 patches and then sew them together. So, chain piece them, like I said, a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is what you want to do for quilting. Don't trim your threads. You can just see how I'm continuing right along, and you can trim the threads after the fact. So here is how it's looking. Now you want to take it over to your ironing board, and you can see that I'm pressing the seams one direction, and then I will press the next row down the seams the opposite direction. So this is called nesting your seams together, because then you can lock those seams together and it will get you the perfect point that you are looking for with the patchwork. So you can see right here, I'm ironing those seams to the other side than that top row that I did. And then the 3rd row down, you're gonna do it again the opposite way, and that will help you to lock those seams together. It's called nesting your seams. This is a really good practice for patchwork quilts. It just makes those points perfect, basically. It makes the piecing process go much easier. So right here, right sides together, and then you can see right here how those seams actually lock together. You can feel it in your fingers, and then take that over to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew it together. So I did the top one. Now I'm gonna sew the 3rd row down. Again, scant 1/4 inch. I'm using R-fill 50 weight thread, 100% cotton, but you can use whatever sort of piecing thread that you like. So here's sort of how it's going. And a 9 patch is basically just the, obviously 9 patchwork pieces. It just makes it a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, especially with these smaller pieces. Then when you're done, you can iron these seams to one side, and as you put them together, you can then nest these seams together as you make your entire quilt. I hope you guys enjoyed watching that process. It's such a cute quilt. I love how it's turning out. And yeah, I hope you guys feel inspired and use up your scraps. Happy sewing. All right, everyone, I hope that gave you some great tips, some ideas, maybe get you started on organizing your scraps and using them up into a project that you'll really enjoy. Stay tuned next week for some more organization videos, and I will keep you updated on how this quilt is going. In the meantime, use up your scraps, organize your fabric, make sure that you're able to use it and enjoy it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have not already, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!